in a forgotten corner of ancient history, buried beneath centuries of political conflict and theological silence, lies a prophecy so disruptive that early Christianity pushed it into the shadows, hoping it would never rise again. Today, it resurfaces like a whisper from the untouched past, carried by fragments of forbidden manuscripts and echoes of voices that refuse to be erased. As you listen, imagine a world where every hidden word carried the power to overturn kingdoms, challenge empires, and rewrite the destiny of faith itself. This is not just a rediscovery. It is a return of a message meant for those bold enough to hear what others tried to bury forever. It begins in the early centuries after the resurrection, when believers were scattered across deserts, mountains, and secret gatherings. Competing teachings circulated freely until a single prophecy began to disturb the unity that leaders desperately tried to build. This prophecy spoke of a future upheaval not caused by an earthly empire, but by a spiritual awakening that would expose deception and restore a truth long overshadowed by human power. Those in control feared it, not because it contradicted Scripture, but because it threatened their authority. So they shut it away, censored its guardians, and rewrote the narrative of the early church, hoping the world would forget. But ancient words have a strange way of surviving in a remote monastery hidden inside cracked leather bindings and languages no longer spoken. Researchers recently uncovered a text referencing a returning wisdom, a prophecy describing a time when believers would no longer depend on institutions to know the divine. It foretold a generation that would seek truth directly, without permission, without fear, without intermediaries. According to the manuscript, the greatest danger to this prophecy was never persecution, but indoctrination, the slow erosion of curiosity, the gentle silencing of questions, and the rewarding of obedience over understanding. As scholars examined its phrases, they discovered something even more unsettling. This prophecy had been quoted in several early Christian writings before quietly disappearing from mainstream tradition. Its disappearance was intentional. The text warned that spiritual blindness would come not from unbelievers, but from leaders who mistook control for protection. It claimed that when institutions prioritized survival over truth, the message of the divine would slip through their fingers, becoming fragmented across continents until the appointed time of restoration arrived. That moment, the prophecy claims, would be recognized by a global hunger for answers, the very hunger rising today. Now, as the prophecy resurfaces, scholars and theologians debate its meaning. Was it meant as a warning, a prediction, or a confrontation against the early consolidation of religious power? What is certain is that its reappearance forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What truths were removed from our history? Why were they removed? And what happens when the suppressed finally returns to the light? The prophecy challenges us not to fear these questions, but to see them as the beginning of a journey, one that leads to a rediscovery of a faith, no longer shaped by silence, but restored by revelation. In the silent corridors of ancient faith, where dust-covered manuscripts whisper truths long buried, a prophecy once feared by kings and erased by early authorities rises again from the shadows. It speaks not of destruction alone, but of a hidden turning point in human history, a moment when forgotten wisdom would surface exactly when the world needed it most. For centuries, this message was concealed, fragmented, scattered across forbidden scrolls and vanished traditions. Yet now, piece by piece, it returns, demanding to be heard. And as we retrace its origins, we find that its disappearance was no accident. It was a deliberate act of silence meant to reshape the destiny of millions. What you are about to uncover begins in remote deserts and mountain monasteries untouched by time, where scribes once guarded a revelation powerful enough to challenge the rising structure of early Christianity. This prophecy foretold a concealed age, an era of spiritual blindness, followed by a global awakening. But such a vision, dangerous to empires and institutions, was suppressed before it could spread. Now, after nearly 2,000 years, the lines preserved in forgotten dialects finally point to a truth the ancient world tried to lock away. And as we examine these rare fragments, a pattern emerges, one that exposes not only what was hidden, but why it had to be hidden. Across continents, we find the same symbols repeating: a veiled messenger, a cosmic warning, a return of knowledge once stolen from humanity. Scholars dismiss these connections as myth, yet the weight of the evidence refuses to fade. The prophecy speaks of a moment when the world would drown in noise, division, and false certainty, until a long-lost revelation resurfaced to restore clarity. It describes a restoration not of institutions, but of perception itself. And as modern discoveries align with these cryptic descriptions, the question becomes impossible to avoid. Were we meant to find this now, or has it been calling to us through centuries of silence? Hidden inside this prophecy is a startling image, a symbol representing humanity as forgotten role between the earthly and the divine, a role later erased from doctrine to preserve control. This ancient warning suggests that when people lose sight of their origin, they also lose sight of their purpose, drifting through history without understanding the forces shaping their world. But the prophecy claims that once this symbol reemerges, individuals across nations will begin to see what rulers, councils, and empires never wanted them to see. And as this symbol appears again in archaeological finds, the prophecy's meaning grows impossible to dismiss. Now we stand in the very era that the prophecy described, an age of revelation disguised as chaos, where buried knowledge rises like embers glowing beneath the ruins of forgotten temples. The resurfacing of this lost text is not an accident of history, but the fulfillment of its own prediction. What was once meant to be erased now returns with astonishing clarity, challenging everything we thought we understood about early faith, hidden power, and the destiny of the human spirit. And as the final lines unfold, one truth becomes undeniable. The prophecy was never lost. It was waiting.